I mean, imagine you're walking into an open house, right?
Okay, yeah, I'm with you.
You're holding the real estate flyer, you're looking around, calculating the square footage, checking the property lines, and you are just ready to make a serious, immediate cash offer.
Right, you've got the checkbook out.
Exactly. But the person currently living in that house, they do not see it as a piece of real estate at all. To them, this structure is like a sacred temple.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the physical manifestation of their identity and their entire history.
So you end up with a complete breakdown in communication right there at the front door.
Complete.
One person is trying to execute a financial transaction, and the other person is experiencing this profound existential insult.
Yeah.
The two sides are just operating in completely different realities. They're using vocabularies that don't even overlap.
And that fundamental disconnect is actually the perfect blueprint for the story we are exploring today. So welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations. We are so glad you're here.
Happy to be here, diving into this.
If you're new here, we focus heavily on international relations, global politics, and Danish political developments. And today, we are taking a deep dive into Donald Trump's recent prediction that Greenland will be under United States control before his term ends in January 2029.
Yeah, it's the kind of statement that immediately dominates European news cycles, right? And it basically triggers security alarms across all of NATO.
Right. And usually when you see this covered in the daily news, it's framed as a story about rare earth minerals or maybe Arctic military logistics or just this bizarre real estate dispute.
Which is the easy angle to take.
It is. But looking at the research and historical analyses in our sources today, our mission is to show you that this isn't a resources or real estate story at all.
No, not really.
It's actually a story about competing religions of sovereignty. We are literally watching two close allies tell completely incompatible stories about the exact same piece of ice.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. Now, before we really get into the weeds of these sources, make sure you follow and subscribe to the show so you don't miss any of our deep dives. And you can also follow iCulture Talking on Instagram for more global insights throughout the week.
Highly recommend checking that out. And just to set a ground rule for you as we get started today, because we are dealing with some incredibly charged quotes today from both American and Danish politicians, we need to establish our baseline.
Right. Totally necessary.
We aren't here to pick a winner or, validate anyone's political platform. We are not taking sides. Our goal here is strictly to analyze these fascinating, conflicting narratives of sovereignty that are in our source material. We just want to unpack how these nations build their realities without endorsing either viewpoint.
Yeah, that is definitely the most productive way to approach this. So let's start with the American side. Because if we want to understand why a U.S. president would publicly demand to acquire a massive territory that already belongs to a close NATO ally, we have to look past traditional geopolitics.
Right, you have to look at the ideology. The sources point us toward a deeply ingrained American ideological framework, which academics actually call frontiering.
Frontiering. When I read that term in the notes, it immediately brought up imagery of the Wild West.
Oh, sure.
Like wagons, westward expansion, manifest destiny, all of that.
And the historical roots are exactly there. But the modern application is less about physical geography and more about a psychological state of mind.
How so?
Well, one of our primary sources provides this really thorough analysis of how the American frontier was never just an objectively verifiable physical space on a map.
Okay.
It's a continuously evolving narrative of identity. Like if we look back to the late 19th century, historians like Frederick Jackson Turner coined the frontier thesis.
Right, I remember reading about that.
Yeah, the argument was that expanding into the wilderness, constantly pushing against the boundary, is the exact mechanism that gave Americans their unique, pragmatic, and democratic character.
So basically, the identity of the nation requires an edge to push past. And without the edge, the identity just stagnates.
Exactly. Taking that a step further, the source argues that this frontier narrative didn't just evaporate when the U.S. ran out of land on the West Coast in the 1890s.
They just needed a new edge.
Right. The U.S. has this long-standing tradition of discursive frontier making. They simply redefine where the frontiers of freedom are located.
Oh, I see.
During the Cold War, the frontier shifted to Korea or Western Europe. During the space race, it was the moon. And today, this fixation on Greenland is a direct extension of that deep-seated cultural myth.
So in this specific mindset, territory is basically viewed as a blank canvas for national destiny.
It's a great way to put it, yeah.
It's like the U.S. is operating like they're playing a game of Monopoly, but they fundamentally do not believe the board has permanent edges.
Yeah, the borders of the board are just suggestions.
Exactly, something to be continuously expanded by sheer will.
And this ideological drive completely overrides the practical facts on the ground,
Mm.
particularly regarding national security.
Right, because the prevailing argument for acquiring Greenland is always that it's an absolute necessity for defense, right?
Yeah, you always hear that it's to keep it out of the hands of adversaries like Russia and China.
Mm.
But the legal and military reality detailed in our defense sources directly contradicts the idea that the U.S. lacks security control there.
Oh, totally. I was looking at the operational details of the defense treaties, and the level of unilateral access the U.S. maintains is just staggering.
It's immense.
We're talking about the 1951 Defense Treaty, which they later upgraded in 2004. Under these agreements, the U.S. operates the Patuxent Space Base, which most people used to know as Thule Air Base, located deep in northern Greenland.
Right. It's located about 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle. And the mechanics of what happens at that base are critical to U.S. defense.
What do they actually have up there?
Well, it houses the northernmost ballistic missile early warning radar system. It provides 247 tracking of potential intercontinental ballistic missile threats coming over the North Pole, as well as space surveillance.
Oh.
And that 2004 upgrade agreement you mentioned specifically allowed the U.S. to modernize those radar systems to tie into their broader missile defense shield.
And the way that 2004 agreement was negotiated really reveals the actual power dynamic at play here. There's this interview in our sources with then Secretary of State Colin Powell from August 2004.
Oh, right, the consultation question.
Yeah, a Greenlandic journalist asks him a very pointed question about the wording in the new treaty. Because the treaty states the U.S. will consult and inform Denmark and Greenland prior to making significant changes at the base.
And the journalist wants to know the actual mechanism behind that word.
Exactly. Like, does consult mean the U.S. actually has to ask for permission?
And Powell's response strips away any illusion of equal partnership.
It's so blunt.
It is. He states clearly consult means consult.
Which is basically political speak for, we're going to do what we want.
Yeah, the mechanical reality of that phrase is that the U.S. will talk to them, they'll inform them of the plans, but neither Denmark nor Greenland holds any actual veto power over U.S. military developments at that base.
The U.S. essentially operates it as sovereign territory.
Pretty much.
So if the U.S. already has the unquestioned military access it claims to need for security, and they don't even need permission to upgrade their systems, the push for literal ownership has to be driven by something else entirely.
Right. The practical defense need is already met.
Yeah, I mean, threatening a 10% tariff on European goods to force Denmark to the negotiating table over this, that isn't a tactic for securing a radar base you already control. It's a tactic for achieving ideological dominance.
And the sources connect this directly back to that frontier narrative we talked about. It's not enough to simply utilize the land for strategic purposes.
The narrative demands ownership.
Exactly. The territory has to be formally incorporated into the American map to satisfy that ideological drive. The map literally must be painted American.
Well, if the United States is treating Greenland like an empty monopoly board to be conquered, that really begs the question of how Denmark views its own role on that exact same board.
Yeah, their reaction is so intense.
Right. Why do they react to these acquisition attempts with such profound, visceral, moral outrage? Because they don't just politely decline the offer. They treat it as an offense to their national soul.
They really do.
Yeah.
And to map out Denmark's reaction, the sources suggest we have to examine their ongoing decolonization reckoning.
It's a complicated history.
Very. Denmark manages a highly complex historical relationship with Greenland, and the academic literature uses a specific, somewhat unsettling term for it, an economy of love.
Economy of love. I mean, on the surface, that sounds like a remarkably benevolent way to describe a colonial relationship.
Well, the benevolence is the core of the myth.
Oh.
The historical analysis shows that Denmark views its past through the lens of the gentle colonizer.
The gentle colonizer.
Yeah. The established narrative in Copenhagen is that Denmark didn't violently exploit Greenland in the way other European powers exploited Africa or the Americas.
Right. They see themselves differently.
Exactly. Instead, the story goes that Denmark modernized it, protected the indigenous population from harsher powers, and provided healthcare and infrastructure.
So in this effective economy, Denmark circulates love, protection, and money.
And in return, the mechanism demands unconditional gratitude and loyalty from the Greenlandic people.
But the historical records in our stack completely shatter that gentle colonizer myth.
Oh, absolutely.
We have to look at the mechanics of the 1951 experiment, which was, quite frankly, anything but gentle. The Danish government, working with organizations like Save the Children, took 22 Greenlandic children away from their families.
Yeah, it's a really dark chapter.
It is. The operational goal was to send them to Denmark, strip them of their language and culture, and assimilate them completely.
And the intent, as twisted as it was framed as philanthropy. They supposedly wanted to create a new, Danish-speaking elite that could return to Greenland and lead the modernization effort.
But the reality was incredibly traumatic. When the children were returned to Greenland, they couldn't even speak to their own families anymore.
So tragic.
Yeah, many were placed in an orphanage in Nuuk rather than returned to their parents. And the Danish government didn't even officially apologize for this operation until December of 2020.
Wow.
So calling that relationship an economy of love requires a massive, deliberate, historical blind spot.
And the academic term for that blind spot is colonial aphasia.
Colonial aphasia.
Yeah, it's a systemic inability to connect the realities of the colonial past with the political present.
Ah, makes sense.
But understanding this guilt and Denmark's intense desire to project itself as a just, ethical, and modern nation today is the only way to understand their response to the United States.
So when Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen calls the U.S. offers to buy Greenland absurd and insists Greenland is not for sale.
She is not haggling over a price. She is not waiting for a higher counteroffer.
The phrase not for sale operates as a profound moral claim, not a real estate rejection.
Exactly. Because under the 2009 Act on Greenland Self-Government, Greenlanders are officially recognized under international law as a people with the fundamental right to self-determination.
So they have a legal path to independence.
They do. The Act provides a legal mechanism for how they can eventually achieve full independence. Currently, Greenland manages most of its internal affairs, but they rely heavily on Denmark for defense, foreign policy, and crucially, economics.
Right, the block grant.
Yeah, they receive a block grant subsidy from Denmark of about 3.4 billion Danish kroner annually. But despite that financial tether, they hold the ultimate legal right to declare independence.
So by standing on the world stage and saying not for sale, Denmark is physically manifesting a post-colonial moral stance.
Right.
They're broadcasting that nations and indigenous peoples are not commodities to be traded between superpowers in some 19th century imperial land swap.
It serves as Denmark's method of proving to the international community, and perhaps more importantly to themselves, that they respect human rights and Greenlandic autonomy.
Right, but the sources highlight a massive structural contradiction embedded in this moral stance, don't they?
They do. The situation creates a paradox that the academics call post-colonial procrastination.
Post-colonial procrastination.
Yeah. Denmark protects Greenland from foreign powers to atone for its colonial past. They loudly support Greenlandic independence in theory. But to achieve actual independence, Greenland has to figure out how to replace that 3.4 billion kroner annual subsidy.
And that money represents roughly half of Greenland's entire public budget. It pays for the schools, the hospitals, the infrastructure. If they declare independence, that money just vanishes.
Exactly. And replacing a subsidy of that magnitude requires a massive, immediate influx of foreign capital.
Which Greenland is actively looking for, right?
Yes. Greenlandic politicians have actively explored foreign investments to build out their mining sector, their rare earth mineral extraction, and their international airports. They are very open to capital from the United States or China.
But whenever those large-scale investments are put on the table, Denmark steps in and warns against them.
Right, utilizing national security concerns as the veto mechanism.
So Denmark basically blocks the exact financial investments Greenland needs to become economically independent from Denmark.
It's quite the catch-22.
It really is. They keep Greenland in a perpetual state of financial dependency, all under the guise of protecting them from predatory superpowers.
Because the ultimate failure of this economy of love for Denmark wouldn't just be Greenland becoming an independent nation.
What would it be?
The nightmare scenario is Greenland choosing to collaborate with a different foreign power, like the US or China, to finance that independence, because it would prove that Denmark's protection wasn't actually necessary.
Right. But if Denmark's defense of Greenland is heavily moral and ideological, how does a small nation practically assert its sovereignty against military titans like the US or Russia? I mean, you can't just throw moral arguments at an icebreaker or a nuclear submarine.
You certainly cannot. The mechanism they use to project sovereignty is symbolic military muscle.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Our sources outline the details of Denmark's massive new defense agreement, which runs from 2024 to 2033. Driven by the kinetic war in Ukraine and the increasing geopolitical pressures in the Arctic, Denmark is making a historical financial investment in its military structure.
They are accelerating their defense spending by an additional 50 billion kroner just over the next 2 years, right? Attempting to meet the NATO requirement of spending 2% of their GDP on defense.
Exactly. And a critical operational element of this funding involves a fundamental overhaul of their conscription model.
What are they changing?
They're expanding mandatory conscription from 4 months to 11 months. They're aiming to process up to 7,500 conscripts yearly. And for the first time in their history, they're implementing full gender equality conscription, including women.
Wow, that is a huge shift.
It is. And crucially for our analysis of the Arctic, they're actively deploying a company of around 100 of these conscripts to Greenland to take over operational tasks.
Okay, I want to look at the practical reality of that specific deployment. Because Greenland is the largest island in the world. It is a massive, unforgiving, geographically hostile Arctic environment.
Unbelievably harsh.
So sending a single company of 100 young conscripts up there, it's kind of like setting up a single aluminum lawn chair in a massive contested parking space.
That is a great analogy.
If a delivery truck really wants that space, the lawn chair provides zero kinetic deterrence. It's just going to get run over. 100 conscripts will not physically stop the U.S. or Russian military.
No, they wouldn't.
So what is the actual mechanism at work here? Why spend 50 billion kroner to set up a lawn chair?
Well, the lawn chair analogy is incredibly accurate for understanding the mechanics of deterrence for small states. Because military deployments for a country like Denmark are rarely about winning a kinetic, force-on-force war against a superpower.
Right.
They are communicative acts. They are profound identity statements. While the lawn chair won't physically stop the truck, it forces the driver of the truck to make a deliberate, aggressive, and highly visible choice to run it over.
I see. So by deploying these conscripts and by having the Danish leadership assert at NATO summits that they will defend every single inch of their territory, Denmark is basically performing its sovereignty.
Performing it is exactly the right term. Think back to the American frontier narrative we unpacked earlier.
The blank monopoly board.
Right. That narrative relies on the assumption that Greenland is essentially empty, unutilized real estate, just waiting for a superpower to manifest its destiny.
Yeah.
By putting boots on the ground, even young conscripts conducting basic surveillance and presence patrols, Denmark is visually and physically countering the U.S. narrative.
They're showing someone is home.
Exactly. They're communicating to Washington and Moscow that the Danish realm is a united, functioning, guarded entity. You cannot just buy it, because it is actively occupied, administered, and defended by its sovereign owner.
So it's the geopolitical equivalent of walking out to that lawn chair every single morning just to remind the delivery trucks that the space is claimed. The value isn't in the combat power of the troops. The value is in the storytelling.
Yes. And this military posturing ties directly back into the effective economy we discussed.
How so?
By conducting these operations, often alongside NATO allies in joint Arctic exercises, Denmark gets to perform the role of the responsible protective parent state.
Feeding the gentle colonizer myth.
Exactly. It visually reinforces their modern identity as a sovereign protector and international team player, actively distancing themselves from their historical role as a colonizer.
Wow. When you look at the architecture of these arguments, it completely changes how you read a headline about defense spending or political arguments over territory.
It really reframes the whole situation.
It does. Let's trace the path of the deep dive we just took. We started with what looked like this clumsy, aggressive real estate dispute, a U.S. president trying to purchase the largest island on Earth. But looking closely at the source material, what we are actually witnessing is a massive geopolitical collision of narratives.
Completely.
On one side, we have the mechanics of the American frontier myth, this deeply ingrained ideology that views territory as an ever-expanding destiny where borders are just lines waiting to be pushed by sheer will.
And on the other side of the collision, we have Denmark, driven by a complex decolonization reckoning and post-colonial guilt.
Right.
They're fiercely defending Greenlandic self-determination to atone for historical traumas like the 1951 experiment, while simultaneously struggling with the economic reality that true independence for Greenland might mean Denmark losing its protective grip entirely.
And caught right in the center of this collision is Greenland itself, an autonomous people recognized by international law, just trying to navigate these two towering, conflicting stories to figure out their own economic survival and political future.
It's an incredibly delicate position for them.
It makes you realize that borders are rarely just drawn on maps, they're constructed in the minds of the people defending them.
Absolutely. And, pushing past everything we've discussed today, there is a fascinating secondary angle to consider regarding Greenland's role in this.
No, what's that?
We've talked about the American myth and the Danish myth. But what happens if Greenland decides to leverage a completely different superpower's narrative to achieve its independence?
Like who?
Well, China has been aggressively pushing its Belt and Road Initiative, specifically branding a polar Silk Road through the Arctic.
Oh, wow.
So what happens if Greenland uses Beijing's myth of global infrastructure development to fund their independence, deliberately playing the U.S. security fears and Denmark's post-colonial guilt against each other?
That would change everything.
As the Arctic ice physically thaws, making these waters more navigable, the future borders might not be decided by international law at all. They might simply be decided by whichever nation is most ruthless at weaponizing their national story.
I mean, that has a wild thought. The homeowner and the aggressive buyer are arguing in the doorway, completely unaware that a third buyer is already quietly inspecting the foundation.
Exactly. It is an incredible dynamic to watch unfold.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today and exploring these sources. If you want to keep untangling these global knots with us, make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast for more insights into diplomacy and international relations.
Yes, please do.
And you can also follow iCulture Talking on Instagram for additional global context throughout the week. Finally, if you enjoyed our analysis today, please leave us a 5-star rating. It is the single best way to help expand our reach and bring these deep dives to more curious minds like you.
It really helps out a lot.
It does. Until next time, look past the headlines and keep questioning the map.